welcome to this week's edition of the Casual Shooters Podcast. This is actually a special edition and your premier podcast for the casual shooter. This week's, or I should say for this special episode, our guest is well known to the podcast. He's been on several times, a couple of debates, and on his own. With that, everybody welcome or help me and welcome me to the show, Yee-min Lin. How you doing, Yee-min?
Good, David. It's always a pleasure to see you on a Monday.
I'm glad somebody finds it a pleasure.
Well, Monday happens at least once a week, so no getting
Unfortunately. Oh, goodness. How are you?
Doing all right. So I'm coming to you all from Florida this week. So kids are on vacation. They're out visiting Yellowstone on a Chinese bus tour. I guess that's a thing out in California and in the New York City area. So they're on a bus to Yellowstone. So I figured I would take the time and come out and visit Jody to actually see her when there's not something work related. So for once, no USPSA, no nothing. Just I think there's this thing called vacations.
I've heard of it. I still think it's a rumor.
Probably is. We should all just move to Europe, and then we would get a mandatory 4-week vacation every summer.
I like it. I'm down. And they have topless beaches. I mean, come on.
Topless beaches are like a great many things we talk about in USPSA. Everything sounds really good in theory, and then when you actually experience it, you go, whoa! I didn't know this was a possibility.
Right. Be careful what you ask for.
Yes, sir.
Oh boy! So a lot has happened since the last time you've been on the show.
Yep.
So the last time I had you on, it was before you became president.
Yes, sir.
Took office January 1. And then sometime, what was it, April?
End of April.
Okay. So end of April, Troy makes a ruling to revoke your RO, and you are subsequently, I don't want to say removed, but removed as USPSA president.
That's right. Yeah, it's okay. 2023 has been quite the interesting year, to say in the least.
That's for sure. I'm feeling the same way you are in different ways. So we had a brief conversation on the phone last week, and one of the things I said I was going to ask you about was, where are you in your head with, I don't know that I would have run again based on everything that happened and everything that occurred. And like I told you, I've had private conversations with board members in the USPSA. I don't know that I would have wanted to run again. So how did you come about that decision from the moment your RO is revoked to not having your name taken off the ballot? How did you get to that? This is what I want to do.
Well, the timing was definitely very unique. The decision was made May 31st to uphold the Director of Enterprise decision to unilaterally revoke my certification, and then per the bylaws, that rendered me ineligible to hold the office of president. What is it? The next day was the deadline to get your petitions in to run for president. And 14 days after that was when the election actually started. So it was definitely a very fast process.
Yeah, it didn't give you much time to think about it.
No, not very much. But as I think we're both familiar in the Marine Corps, semper gumby, you kind of have to address the situation at hand and proceed forward. And for me, there was some really good progress that we were making, within the short period of time that I was in office. I really wanted to make sure that as an organization, we were more effectively communicating, what it was that we were doing in the organization, why it was that we were doing things within the organization. It doesn't hurt to basically give that context, you talk a little bit about the way limited optics was issued as a provisional division. We did have members that expressed their concerns about provisional divisions. Basically, once they're created, they just, they're automatic, right? So that was a concern that was addressed during the discussion. Where, look, this is new territory, but at the very least, we put something out there that said, hey, in order for this provisional division to become a permanent division, we want a little bit of a metric that's achieved. Whether that metric is made the most sense, at least it was putting a standard out there. 5% of activity participation. I mean, that was basically what single stack had over the last couple of years. And so, putting something out there and communicating at the membership that at least lets the members know, hey, we are actually listening to the members' concerns about putting divisions out there. And then just constantly, communicating with the membership about, well, this is what we're looking at. This is why we're looking at things. So, and the surveys have shown that, right? So there's been a set of surveys that were recently released to the membership asking about some items that we had brought up at the beginning of the year. So we're still reviewing, the concept of, is production as a division still viable in its current setup? What are some adjustments that we can do? There's some context that can be added in terms of, what is production now? Is production still the same thing that it is when it was created, 20 plus years ago? There's a very interesting concept out there with L10, adding optics, there's and adding the context into that of, what we could potentially do with that to make it a division that is different than what it was when it was first created, and even limited optics itself. So, the communication of, well, why is limited optics not major? Why should it not be included in carry optics? And that sort of communication to the membership is something that I felt was a good start and needed to be continued as much as possible. Part of my time out in the wilderness, going back and participating at the club matches, the volunteerism and the community that exists. We do all, we're not exactly doing this for the pink Cadillac at the end of the day. A great amount of the time we go out there for our friends. We go out there for the people that we wouldn't necessarily meet in our professional and personal lives. And we're all bonded by this sense of, wanting to exercise our Second Amendment rights, increasing our proficiency in firearms, whether it's pistol or PC, handgun, PCC, long gun, shotgun, whatever. And just building that community. I think for both of us, having been in the Marine Corps, there's a strong bond that exists, no matter how much time you spend, whether you're a first termer or you're a retiree. And my time in USPSA, is probably the closest I've been to in a while, where, you see that same sort of community and camaraderie. And, after taking a step back and going, okay, well, this wasn't exactly the greatest situation that I could be in. It's remembering, the original reasons why, and it's for the members. The members are showing that they're wanting to be a little bit more involved. They want to have a little bit more. They want more of a voice in terms of how the organization's being run. And I think it's only fair that, if we look at the bylaws for the president, the president is, at the end of the day, the national representative for the membership. And so, I think we've spoken about it before. Sometimes, maybe I'm still that wet behind the ear second lieutenant that just joined the platoon and goes, hey, the idealism is still there, and there still is good and a viable mission to be accomplished. And just because you go through the hero's journey of things taking a little bit longer than you expect, and having to deal with various obstacles and concerns, that doesn't mean that the original goal is viable, or that it's valid. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I still felt that there was work to be done. There was work to be done for the members, and that we as an organization need to do right by the members that give us their time and money and volunteerism to help the sport run.
Okay. Now, even though I've had private conversations with BOD members, I don't know what the complaint was or what the findings were. The only thing I do know is that the RMIs um, did not recommend you having your RO revoked. And I guess the other half of the question that I was asking was, are you able to put a? This is where I don't. I told you I could not have run again because even come January 1, but definitely not by the time I would have had to have made a decision about running again. Could I have put my emotions aside with how I felt that the individual went above and beyond what was recommended, um, which ended up causing the RO to be revoked? Are you are you able to put those emotions aside, or is the 6 months enough time, or 5 months, whatever it is, to be able to, assuming you're voted back in, that's enough time that can pass that there are no hard feelings per se?
Well, I think the line of The Godfather probably says it best, right? It's not personal; it's business. Um, we both know, having been in the Marine Corps, there's responsibility to command, and there's you know there is a process that was in place. We may not necessarily agree with the process or how things were handled, but at the end of the day, the process does exist. And as a range officer, there's a certain expectation that's out there. We can have philosophical discussions about how that behavior should be. What is considered uh, acceptable and what isn't. Trying to find that balance between, hey, we're all volunteer time, we're here to enforce the rules, but we've all seen our share of commanders that have different interpretations on how to be that in that position of authority. At the end of the day, uh, for me, there are things to be learned from that experience. So there's one thing to be said when you're a lieutenant or a corporal, and you can behave in a particular way around the men, and then when you become a captain or a staff NCO, you have to kind of adjust your behavior. And then when you become a senior staff NCO or you become a field grade officer, some you have there's an adjustment that has to take place, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still be true to your own personality. It's just an understanding that there's a different dynamic that exists. I have a good friend of mine that's kind of repeatedly told me this. What is that? There's that scene in Band of Brothers where one of the junior officers is basically told right before D-Day, you never want to put yourself in a position where you take away from the men. And I think that's a good mindset for me to keep in mind moving forward, is that when you are the president or where you're in a position of authority, you are in a different tier, and there is a balance between being friendly and being open and being accessible to the members, and then maybe getting a little bit too personal. Things that we talk about in private. When it becomes everybody's looking at you. It just is what it is, and it's been a lifelong learning experience, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah, it never ends. And that brings up one of the topics we did talk about, which was pretty interesting, because we probably talked about it for 10 to 15 minutes at a minimum, maybe 20 minutes. But that's what I like to call the circle of power. That's what I've termed it, and that's where the ROs report to DNROI, but DNROI reports to the BOD, but people on the BOD are also range masters or CROs or ROs. So it's like this big circle, this big loop. And one of the things we talked about was there's going to have to be some separation in there because um, the example I was using, let's say Kyle or Ben coming in, they get a complaint, and we'll just say for the sake of argument, it's legitimate. Um, but maybe it doesn't go to the point of revoking their RO, but they feel like they were slighted by Troy. Well, Troy still has to report to them. So then there's the chance that, they could then act out on Troy. You know what I mean? So there's opportunity here within the bylaws and everything where you and I'll just say Troy. I'm not meaning him personally, but
Right.
he's in that position. So I'm using his name. Where if he has a beef with one of the BODs and there's a complaint, well, he could act on that. If the BOD has a beef with Troy, then they could also do the same. So there also seems to be that catch-all where we need to find a way to create a check and balance in there so that you don't have these personal beefs or grudges that could then feed into something bigger.
No, I mean, I agree with that assessment. Look, having your elected officials be RO certified so they have a little bit of skin in the game and a little bit of a better understanding of the decisions that it has to make, that the board has to make in order to influence the organization. I think that was a very viable thought process, and having a range officer discipline process that was more spelled out. So you know I think I, along with quite a few people, didn't realize that there was a modified RO discipline policy until my situation came up, and it's spelled out. And it's more defined as a process. But then looking at the unintended consequences of, okay, well, we want all the board of directors to be RO certified, but they fall under the same discipline policy that ultimately ends with whoever the director of NRI is. Um, I think what we've certainly found over the last 2 years is, between the bylaw changes and all the different issues that have come up during the multiple elections, there's a fair amount of unintended consequences in terms of, okay, well, we looked at this in a vacuum and this is a viable thing. We looked at this in a vacuum and this is a viable thing. But then looking at how they mesh together, I've heard some comments about, well, I would never put myself in that position. And I think that's not necessarily the point. I mean, the point is, well, even if you never intend to put yourself in a situation where you would be subject to the decisions of a single individual, it's not that's not the argument. The discussion and the examination really should be, okay, well, what if that does happen? What if you are put in that situation? How is that addressed? So there's definitely been a lot of new ground, but it is a viable question. I mean, you've got right now two range masters that are on the board. So Russell Fortney is the incoming Area 8 director. Scott Arnberg is a current Area 3 director, and that is a very interesting question to ask, right? As range masters, they technically answer to the director of NRI. But as board members, they're also supervising the director of NRI for the bylaws. And so that there is the potential. And I think at the end of the day, that's really the answer is, okay, well, what is the potential for any conflict of interest, back and forth? So we'll see. I mean, it's on the agenda for tomorrow. So we'll see how we'll see what discussion comes out when the meeting minutes emerge at the end of this week.
For sure. I wanted to back up for a minute because you talked about limited optics, and maybe I can get a little more clarification since you're more familiar with that, way more than I am. The 5% participation, is that level twos and above, or is that level ones and above?
The 5% at the time was just across the board, right? So we talk about, I really, you've been putting up some really great numbers. I think Jay Slater's been putting up some really great numbers about participation at the various major matches. But when we talk about activity, the activity discussion at the time was really across the entire organization, because, the reality is, I think, what is it? Something like 10% of the membership actually attends a level 3 match and above. I mean, the vast majority of the participation is going to be at the club level, and that's where the focus should be as far as participation is concerned. So it was 5% across the board, and I think the numbers so far have demonstrated that limited optics is far exceeding that metric.
Okay. I mean, it's only been in place since May 1st, and it's already exceeding limited 10 revolver and single stack. So almost combined,
Right.
or 3, 7, yeah. So it's still trailing production, but I don't know what the numbers are for level ones. I don't even try to look at all of that. So that would be a lot more. But I also don't know, like production level twos and above. We're only talking 5.84%, but I don't know how that number changes locally because I feel like your carry optics numbers are probably even higher locally, but I feel like your production numbers might be higher too, as well as limited. So who knows what the number is with that added in.
Right. I mean, production is, production philosophically is a very interesting position right now. You look at what production was like when it was first brought into the sport. We're talking about in the middle of the assault weapons ban, high capacity magazine bans. Your definition of a production gun at that point is, a Glock with 10 round mags, and that was pretty much universal. You skip to 2023 right now, and a production gun that you can buy at the dealer, you're looking at Canics, Walthers, the new Springfield Echelon. These are guns that are still roughly within the same price range, about $500 to $600, but they have features that I don't think anybody would have expected 20 plus years ago. Right? You're looking at standard capacity magazines, somewhere between 17 and 20 rounds, and these guns have triggers and features and things that we would have considered custom not even 7-8 years ago, slide cuts, all these other things that that we basically changed the paradigm. So part of the discussion about production, increasing the mag limits in production is trying to acknowledge that the market has shifted in what production is. So is production a low capacity minor only division, or is production what it was when it originally came in, which is, hey, you should be able to go to a gun store, buy a gun, and show up with that gun with whatever mags came with it and be able to shoot a match. And that has definitely shifted. I mean, again, you can show up with a Canic Rival or a Canic Rival SF. You're paying what, $500 to $650, and that gun is basically competition ready out of the box.
Yeah. And you definitely, like you said, 23 years ago when Ernest Langdon won the very first production nationals in year 2000, I mean, you would have never guessed that 23 years later that we'd be where we are, where a production gun basically, like you said, has slide cuts. You can put an optic on it. Comes with 17 to 20 round magazines, a couple of them, ambidextrous safeties or mag releases and slide stops. Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And the aftermarket to support all of it being there too.
No, it's really changed what we think about production. And so, part of the challenge as a nonprofit organization is that it takes time to adjust to the market realities. And one of the things that we were trying to do with limited optics is get a little bit ahead of the power curve. And I think we've done a fairly solid job of that, right? I mean, it was essentially limited with an optic. I know there's questions about major versus minor. Realistically, there's one optic, I think, that exists right now that could even stand up to major power factor, reciprocating impulse. And then if you were looking at production demand and what the manufacturers are creating, there's not really a whole lot of demand for 40 major limited guns, especially limited optic guns. I mean, I think that number is in the single digits, 1 to 3%. Some manufacturers, it's high it's high quantity custom orders only. So does that mean we're necessarily stifling innovation by saying, hey, we're not going to have major? That it's still possible, but it's certainly not something that the market is particularly inclined to look at right now.
So what are you? I mean, maybe you don't want to tip your hand. I don't know, but which way are you leaning? By increase production to 15 rounds, or just whatever fits in the box? By kind of like with a, or just carry optics without the optic.
So initially when we talked about the options, so IPSC talks about 15, and when IPSC talks about the decision they made for 15, it was a little bit of an arbitrary decision, ironically enough. So it wasn't necessarily politically based. It was just, hey, let's just pick 15. It's a little bit like race car homologation, right? You're just trying to have like a single standard. At the time, I really liked the idea of just, hey, if it fits in the box, you can just load up to whatever capacity exists. And then that's part of the beauty of having those discussions with the members is, they're able to bring up ideas that goes, well, okay, well, what if I fit it in the box and I take out the factory follower and I put in, a thinner follower? It still fits in the box. It's still a factory magazine, but now the guts are slightly different. And then you start to think about those unintended consequences, right? So, Keanu Sai, he's doing some crazy things out there with designing a new follower that just, works and everything. He really wants to make that Beretta PX4 work, but it's something that's really, brought up a very interesting concept, which is, okay, well, if I can take a Canik TP9, a Canik magazine, and I put a thinner follower and slightly different springs, it fits in the box, still has a base pad, but now instead of 18, 19 rounds, I can fit 21 rounds. Okay, is that really the direction that you want to go with production? Do we sort of make production where now it does sort of becomes an arms race, and production in its initial concept was, hey, we want to try to establish some kind of level playing field. So I'm a little bit more amenable to just, hey, let's just leave it at 15. The idea of ROs not, having a difficulty counting to 15 or whatnot. 15 is still something where if I show up with 3 magazines, you should be able to shoot your typical club match without having to buy extra magazines. We do recognize that stage design these days is definitely more catered towards higher capacity. It just is what it is, and any questions about like the cheating in the sport or whatnot, look, we've actually done a pretty good job of sort of self-identifying and self-correcting. The USPSA is very much like the military, it sort of self-corrects itself. So, people are generally going to find out very quickly if somebody's loading to 17, 18, 19 or whatever, as opposed to 15. I mean, we all just inherently do the math, and peer pressure goes a long way to self-correcting things. So I'm a little bit more inclined towards 15 right now than magazine capacity. So it's still an adjustment to having a defined standard that everybody knows this is what you're supposed to function in, and at the same time it still kind of keeps with the idea of production.
Okay. I can see that, and I've never had to count rounds from someone while they're shooting, so I don't know if that's even a thing or not. The difficulty meaning. So I go back and forth because I've had Tyler Turner on, and he wants to keep it 10. There are people who like the 10 because it becomes part of their stage strategy, figuring out where the reloads are going to be. But on the other hand, I do personally like the 15 round limit better because, one, for those people who are going to shoot production and want to do IPSC, okay, there you go. You're already there. You already know what's going on. But secondly, you still have to figure out, with only 15 rounds, if you have a 32 round stage or even a 30 round stage, you're going to have to figure out two different reloads in there. So you still have to strategize and figure out where that's going to be. But at the same time, you don't have to worry about, oh, I moved over here and I've got 8 shots. So I'm going to have to reload as soon as I turn. You know what I mean? It gives you a few more rounds to kind of play with, gives you a little bit more strategy to work with. That's my opinion. I prefer the at least 15 rounds,
Right.
and not keeping it at 10.
Well, I mean, another interesting point that was brought up in the conversation was actually about classifiers themselves. So until Bruin becomes the law of the land at every state, we still have states that are capacity restricted, limited, and that was actually a viable concern, right? So if you are a production competitor and you're shooting the classifiers that are out there, and you're only restricted to 10 rounds, there is going to be a performance difference in a state that says, hey, I can load to 15, and a state that I can load to 10. So there was something, that was another wrinkle in the discussion that goes, oh, okay, well, maybe one of the considerations going forward is that, we at least try to provide some classifiers that are low capacity friendly, right? So again, classifiers that are equitable for anybody shooting in any state. That's roughly 10 rounds. I mean, your 10 round and below classifiers right now, I mean, there's a pretty small list of that, if I remember correctly. And so if you're in a capacity restricted state, you're kind of stuck shooting some of those same classifiers over and over again.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So last year, 2022, you and I were on the same squad at Carry Optics Nationals, and we had that. Luigi was on our. Oh wait, was that the year before? The 444. Shoot, maybe it was the year before actually.
It was probably the year before. It was the can you count? It was the can you count classifier with movement, basically 4 targets, 4 targets, 4 targets.
Correct.
Right.
But so if you're a normal production shooter, you would shoot the first 4 array, reload, shoot the second 4, reload, shoot the last 4. But even with 15, you're gonna. So it wasn't Virginia count. So you're like, okay, I have 16. I have exactly 16 rounds.
Right.
So do I just want to reload anyway, going between arrays, or do I want to risk it and hope that I get it clean and with no makeups, so I'm not having a reload in the middle of an array? You know what I mean? So there's still that. You still have to consider the same issues with 15 that you do with 10.
Right.
It's just not necessarily as bad. But there's an example on a classifier. You still have to, because look, Luigi shot that thing. He had a Walther, but he's using a Canic mag that he can get 23 in, and he's got 1 in the chamber. So he had 24 rounds. He let me use his magazine. So I had 24, but not everybody has that. So there's still that whole strategy. And then you're like, do I really want to do it this way? Because what if I still have a makeup shot? I'm still going to have to reload anyway. And there are opportunities moving from one array to the other. If you're a Jay Beal, an Isaac Lockwood, a Rob Epifania, Tim Herron, who, choose another name with lightning fast reloads, you can easily reload before your next array. So I don't know. I like the idea of moving it away from 10, one way or another.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the beauty of kind of, the information that we're seeing from you and a couple other folks on Instagram is actually putting some data to that, right? Everybody instinctually thinks like, oh, if I reload, I'm automatically at a disadvantage. Okay, then that's when you basically put the data out there, right? Okay, is there any opportunity to reload? Does this really impact your classifier score? And I think that's more data for the sport. I mean, this is the age of fantasy football, right? So the more statistical data you put out there, people are naturally going to want to eat that up and try to analyze that as much as possible. And I think that's something that we should be doing within the sport, is just showing the numbers. Hey, here's all the numbers out there. Go do your fantasy football analysis and come back and tell us what you think.
Oakland A's Moneyball.
I can't really comment on that, sir, because clearly Moneyball did not work out that well. Since apparently every sports team is leaving Oakland and going to Vegas.
That's just so they can bet more.
Probably, but they are getting much nicer facilities. Oh, God, yeah,
But I mean, they won a championship with Moneyball.
yes, they did.
So, so you can't, they did something right with the statistic. That one guy's a genius.
Yes, he was.
So, all right, so I do want to go back for just a moment because one of the other things we talked about was relationships. Because you and I had talked where, when you came in, Scott was coming in, Frank was coming in, or no, wait, Frank was already there. Scott was coming in, but Mel was coming in, and you were coming in. So there was a decent amount of turnover on the board. So now everybody has to learn how to work together and with each other to try to accomplish things. And now we're going to be doing it again January 1, where you're going to have that same turnover again. Russell might be coming in early. Who knows? I don't know. I don't have any inside information on that. But since Area 8 is vacant and he was elected, it only makes sense to me that Russell take that office early, assuming he wants to.
Right. Well, I mean, there is precedent for that. I mean, Matt Hopkins, when he was elected, he was brought in early, so I think it would
Yeah,
make sense from a leadership continuity standpoint.
totally agree. But then you're still having to build those relationships. Um, you'll be at, assuming you get elected, you'd be at more of an advantage because you will have already experienced that. So your learning curve is much shortened, and you've built some relationships there. But if you would just touch on that briefly about that whole thing when you first got in and realizing what you had to do and how it's no different, I'm sure, than U.S. politics. They're going into the Capitol, whether it be a state or federal, thinking I'm going to do this, that, and the other, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I got to work with these other 300 people. Oh, crap.
Well, I think that challenge still exists. There really isn't a transition period. I mean, we like to talk about desktop and turnover binders, in the military, and that, for better for worse, is not something that really exists. So, I mean, even for myself, and for Scott Arnberg, having some understanding and some viewing behind the curtain of the current issues, and how we thought those issues were going to be addressed, and then actually being in the position and going and trying to figure out the back history and the context. I think that's one of the biggest challenges with our leadership transitions with area directors in general. You have area directors, they show up, and there's the context they get on, hey, these are the current issues, and here's the history behind the current issues, and here's who does this, and here's who does that, right? I mean, we do talk about, your example of politics, and in U.S. politics, there's usually some, professional congressional staffer core that basically says, hey, I know you're a freshman, and here's the freshman caucus, and here's the introduction into kind of how the voting actually works, when you need to be there, so on and so forth. um, that really is sort of a catch and catch all process. So I know it was certainly a challenge for Scott coming in and saying, okay, Scott, like, I know you're really focused on finances. Okay, here's kind of what we have right now. Here's the context. Here's what we're dealing. And whenever an issue would come up, just saying, hey, this is kind of the history that's occurred beforehand. And it is definitely a challenging process, because the archival data isn't exactly accessible.
Do you think, given time, that the managing director can smooth some of that out because everybody else on the BOD, everybody is elected. Therefore, you're going to have turnover. But if you have a managing director, I guess you could have some consistency. Do you feel that over time that position has the capability to smooth some of that transition out and make that a little bit more well defined for everybody?
I know I definitely believe that it was a process that we were working on in terms of, hey, what should this turnover look like. Um, we're definitely asking our managing director to do a lot. It is something that was brought up in board meetings, saying, hey, we've hired this managing director to do all these things, and that is a justifiable response. But at the same time, if you're saying, hey, we want the managing director to do these 100 things, and you've only got so much time in the day, um, at some point there has to be, trying to giving some sort of prioritization, right? Okay, you know, we know that we're very focused on the financials this year, so your focus should really be on the financials, making sure that that information is there so that we can, provide an answer back to the membership. And I think that's a concept that's something that that's a concept that really needs to be reinforced. Is that, look, if you have employees of the organization that are making decisions that the members don't agree with, um, those members aren't exactly going to go to that employee and go, hey, why did you do this? I mean, we have a board of directors for a reason. So ensuring that the board of directors has the ability to answer questions from the membership in a cogent fashion, it requires information to be able to say, okay, well, you're not necessarily agreeing with why employee XYZ is doing something, but this is the reason why. And that was definitely a work in progress to be able to say, look, we're not necessarily trying to get into micromanage and get into your business, but if we get questions from the membership, we're the ones that have to answer that. And if we can't
Right.
answer those questions, or we just provide nothing but silence, that's not exactly a good look
That's
either.
worse.
I think, and
That's worse, actually.
yeah, and I think we've definitely seen that, since 2021, 2022,
Yes.
absence of, ignoring requests and not answering it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get any better.
Right. And I guess part of what I'm so I'll paint a picture real quick, and that is because we both know turnover binders. We understand what that is. So if people are listening and don't understand, it's literally when you're in the Marine Corps and you went to another command, like when I went to the sniper school, there was literally a binder I could pull out and look at it and go, oh, okay, these are examples of this that we do. These are examples of that we do, and this is basically all of the things that encompass my job. So when I get there, I may not know exactly what's going on, but if I pull out the binder, at least it kind of acclimates me to the situation. And I feel like I'm not a fan of a managing director position. However, if we're going to have that, then we need to pay the person appropriately. And I feel like this is where they can manage, whether it's Donna or anybody else. So this is not a, I'm not, I'm not here to point fingers. I'm just putting my thoughts out as to how I envision this thing. Where Yee-min comes in January 1, and she gives you access through director of IT. Like, here's your welcome package, Yee-min, chats with you, and gives you the electronic keys to your file on their server. So you can go in there and go, oh, okay, here's all the projects for the president that still need to be completed. Here are other timelines, and here's some other stuff I can do. Here's some resources, blah, blah, blah. I feel like that's a way that we can kind of smooth out that transition where we're not having to reinvent the wheel every 4 years.
That was kind of a work in progress. I think for a lot of area directors coming in, the immediate challenge is just understanding how board meetings function, right? How board
Mm-hmm.
meetings function, how Robert's Rules of Order works, parliamentary procedure, um, and yes, the president is responsible for that, but it's also a learning experience. I mean, Donna did a great job at the in-person board meeting. She created this, that she actually did create a binder for the in-person board meeting that actually was like your dummy's guide to parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order, was a really great resource. But I think that's the part of the biggest challenge is that, is getting board members to understand, like, look, a board meeting is, the board meeting has a flow to it. There is a process by which you're supposed to talk about things. And it's not necessarily the same collegial fashion that we're talking here, because if we do that, board meetings can take a really long time. I mean, we're talking about a number of different topics, but it's just the two of us. Right. Board meetings were definitely a lot longer than I would have liked. And some of it was, quite frankly, because we did have a lot of information that we needed to cover. And some of it was also just trying to keep things, on task. Look, this is the topic we're going to talk about. We're only going to spend a certain amount of time, and making sure that you're doing that within the right way. So, even with my experience, being a president of Richmond Rod and Gun Club, I still had to learn a lot about Robert's rules, and how to appropriately do things within a parliamentary procedure. Frank Rizzi was a really great assistance for that. I mean, he's still the president of Colonial Gun Club in Staten Island. So, he was very, very knowledgeable in that, and it was a great resource while I was there as president.
Was there any, because you can go back and look at the notes from all of the different meetings, and they would go, 5 or 6 hours, and like, my gosh, what in the world why are these things ending after midnight? Was there ever any discussion like 10 p.m. is our limit? If we don't get to everything, then we'll motion for another meeting in 2 weeks to take up the subjects that weren't discussed and finish it that way. Because, I mean, look, you're, like you said it yourself. Everybody's a volunteer, so everybody has a life outside of their BOD responsibility. Russell's coming in. We know he has a full-time job. Why would anybody want to stay up past 10 if you're getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning to go to your regular bill-paying job? You know what I mean?
No, that there were definitely moments where we did move to table things until another meeting. I think it still kind of highlights the issues of having a part-time volunteer board position, right? Board meetings ideally would be more about decision making rather than discussion. You would assume that you would want to try to do a lot of the discussion beforehand, and there's just challenges to that. I think trying to find the right balance of what the board members time constraints are, what they're able to pay attention to, filling them in. I mean, that was an ongoing work in progress, going into board meetings and saying, okay, look, this is the agenda. Okay, I know you guys have day jobs. Here's all the context, take a look at this document. If you have any questions, at least you've gotten the high level briefing on it. It's a cultural change, and sometimes that was received well, and sometimes there was a little bit more resistance to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot to be done too. So I can see where it's very demanding on individuals, to split their time between stuff they're doing for USPSA and working their full-time job, where they don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize that job either.
Right. No, the demand is we talked about it briefly, where you just say, look, if there's at least some sort of transition document that I can look at that says, hey, these are all the issues that we've been dealing with for the last year, and here's the historical context. At that point, you're at least putting the responsibility on the individual to say, hey, I'll take the time to be able to do this research on my own. And I think what I've seen is what I observed in my time there was that you pretty much just got thrown in You pretty much just got thrown in with all your gear and hey, go swim. I hope you don't sink to the bottom and need the rescue swimmer.
Right. I was just looking at the survey. I just had a quick question. What are your thoughts on optics and limited 10? Because, like you said, I've been throwing out numbers, and if it were up to me, limited 10 revolver and single stack, something has to be done. I'm not saying they have to be eliminated, but something has to be done. When at level 2 matches, limited 10 is 0.69% participation, revolvers 1.12%, and single stack is at 2.58. There's a big problem. So we're only talking what, four and a half, roughly four and a half, a little less than 4.5% participation in all of those three combined.
Right.
So do you?
So I mean, when optics in L10 was initially presented, after the initial, okay, why are we thinking about that? There actually is some validity to that. I mean, we've never historically, I think the membership does have a good point in acknowledging that once a division is created, it never really goes away. I think it goes back to not wanting to take away from the membership, and not. And so if you were to think about adding optics to L10, well, what does that do? Well, it does at that point become a little bit of an experimental division. It does become a purely low capacity division. The discussion at the time was really just optics. Yes, that's it. Whether that's refined or not, I mean, I think we've got about 2 or 3 months left before that needs to be presented to the board. But it was just, if you want to put optics on a gun, have at it. So what does that do? That does provide a little bit of experimentation within slide mounted optics for major or frame mounted optics. It did provide the opportunity for your I-Core guys to be able to come in. Now, whether they're actually going to do that, I mean, we can talk about that for days. But at the end of the day, it does provide an option for those people that shoot I-Core and have optics on revolvers and just say, hey, I still want to be able to shoot my revolver. I mean, there is a core group of people that shoot revolver. I think when we talk about single stack and revolver, the two things the one thing that really supports both of those divisions is that they are unique. If nothing else, they're unique, right? Revolver is its own action type. There's not really, revolver doesn't really fit into any other division.
Yeah, it's unique.
And single stack is basically a 1911, right? It doesn't really fit into any other division. So there is at least a uniqueness to those two divisions that maybe doesn't exist with L10. I mean, L10, I think we can say, is an artifact of a bygone political time. So one of the having optics in L10, if nothing else, it would be an opportunity to say, okay, this is a low capacity division, and it can be somewhat experimental. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have in USPSA, and it was part of the message I tried to put out, is that whenever you have new technology that could potentially impact the sport, there really isn't a good place to say, hey, let's put this in a box somewhere. Let's experiment with this and see, what the impact is, where it fits, how could it potentially impact the game as a whole before you actually bring it in. So the only option we really have is a provisional division, right? That's how carry optics came into being, right? Well, what do I do with a production gun that has a slide mounted dot? I mean, all the arguments that people are putting against limited optics, those are the same arguments that were presented against carry optics when it first came out. 2014, 2013, 2014, 2015. It was, yeah, you have a place for that. Go shoot an open. Okay, we know that's not what open is, right? It doesn't allow you to properly evaluate the viability of that technology, because we all know open is basically a 2011 with a comp, frame mounted optic, shooting major. You shoot anything other than that in open, it basically skews the numbers and it doesn't give you a realistic assessment. So, optics in L10, I was definitely warming to the idea. After the discussion, I was like, okay, this could be potentially some kind of an experimental division that's relatively low impact within the sport itself. I mean, look, at the end of the day, people will say, well, why do we have these many divisions? Like, okay, well, are you shooting L10? Like, what is the impact to you? Like, even the numbers that you've done the assessment with, right? It's what, less than 1% are shooting L10. So even as far as your administrative impact to awards and whatnot, that's not that doesn't appear to me to be a significant impact, right? You still have to meet your minimum requirements to have an award. So if you have one guy that decides they want to, three guys that decide they want to shoot L10, well, okay, have at it. I'm glad they're coming to participate.
Yeah, I have a couple of that. I almost feel like if you want to have limited optics, minor, okay, and do away with limited 10, you just have limited optics, whatever fits. With carry optics, and then like I agree with you about revolver and single stack. Those two are hard to do away with. They're somewhat unique. One is based on a frame, and the other one is a whole unique, another completely different frame with a rotating cylinder, and it is completely different. So I almost like I kind of like the idea what you said, just optics or not. But interesting. I think Jay was saying something about limited 10 and revolver. He mentioned something about shooting limited 10 with a revolver. It was I don't remember now exactly. It was recently too, like either today or yesterday, because you almost have the same capacity. I think he has like 8 round capacity in his revolver.
It is an 8 round capacity. It would be interesting if the rules were modified so that revolver major was not just 6 rounds. So I'd have to do the research, but I think you could probably find some 8 round 357 revolvers out there. But per USPSA rules, it's only 6 major 6 rounds. So
Okay.
and it is literally a needle in a haystack finding anybody shooting revolver in major. I think I've seen it 3 times in 10 years.
Oh wow. I mean, because I'm looking at the stats I have right now. I mean, we've had a total of 0 GMs shooting a level 2 match or above in limited 10. 0, not a single one. We
If
only
it's
have 5
if it's not an L10 nationals,
exactly.
right?
Yep. 5 in revolver and 10 in single stack. So now limited optics only has 3, but how many people are actually qualified? I mean, you have more unclassified individuals on the statistics than any other category because it just hasn't been out long enough for people to get classified. But they still have more limited optic GM competing than limited 10.
Right.
So, like you said, unless it's going to be at Iron Sight National, somebody's going to shoot it. But something's got to be done because those are pretty pathetic numbers. So, I mean, even production really at 5.84%, not very big.
Right. Well, it is kind of a high capacity. It's a high capacity optics world. I mean, I think what we're looking at, and so then philosophically the question is, okay, do we need to try to adjust do we need to try to direct the sport in a way so that it's supposed to be equitable for every division, or do we really just acknowledge that, hey, your typical gun owner these days is more than likely to buy a firearm that has an optic on
it. 100%. Yeah.
And
I mean,
and at the end of the day, is that is it such a such a demand where you're like, oh my gosh, we absolutely have to do something about this, right? So I mean, your participation in your major matches is still basically capped it's a math problem. We can only fit so many people. So then at the club level, well, is that really something that's impacting somebody at the club level to say, oh my gosh, if we don't get rid of L10, or if we don't do something about single stack or revolver, people are still going to show up at a club match and basically shoot whatever they decide to shoot that day. And the club matches are still ultimately what drives the sport. I mean, shoot, I have to admit, I wasn't practicing at all. I mean, I didn't really have a whole lot of motivation to practice, and definitely shooting with a dot. If you're not doing it every day, it's kind of a problem. Especially the older I get, I have a new empathy. I'm going, wow, I think I might actually need to get glasses now. This is bad. And but I still enjoy my time shooting single stack. So at a couple club matches, I just decided, well, I'll show up and shoot single stack major. And even if I'm the only guy, I think the last match I was two guys out of 160 shooting single stack, but I didn't really care. I mean, it was nice to know that I could still shoot. I could still do the math. I could still do the reloading. And I think something that's something that I really needed to remember. It's there is a portion of us where we're just like, hey, we're always going to constantly get better. We're going to try to improve. But then for the vast majority of us, it's like, okay, well, what do I feel like shooting today? All right, I'll go shoot this. Can you still have fun with that? Yes, you can.
Yeah. And this is where the local circuit are your fun matches. You go, you hang out with your buddies, you shoot whatever you want, you do what you want to do. For those people trying that, for the 10% that want to go further, then they're going to pick a division and get better at it. You know what I mean? Once they feel like they've mastered it, like we have a local guy, Josh Shaw, GM. Well, for the longest time, I saw him shooting the same type guns. Well, now I see him branching out and shooting all kinds of different things, just making himself a more well-rounded shooter in general. But he still kind of focuses on one. But that's how I see those 10% that move up. They're gonna focus. So the local matches, yeah, people are going to come and shoot whatever. They may shoot something different each match. Who knows? But there should be more play in there for those match directors at the local one to be able to have a little more wiggle room as to what people can or can't shoot with. Like before they made appendix legal for everybody for every level, they could have just said appendix is legal at all level one matches. We don't care. We'll have different rules for major matches, but I kind of like the idea of having a little bit more freedom at the local level to do what you want,
right,
within reason. Well, whatever within reason is.
Well, that's a challenge. I mean,
Yeah,
I have a very robust, culture out in California. You have a pretty robust culture in the Northern Virginia area, but I think we've all heard about clubs that are a little bit different.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
Yes, sir.
I have no issue with that whatsoever. But yeah, it's something I feel almost like it's just got to be completely realigned because it's just not. I feel like we are 20 years behind the current trend. So something's got to be done there. Now, from what your time in office, so you've had a little bit of behind the curtain time. Now you're running again. Say you get elected. Is there anything you've added or removed from what you were running on before? Are you going to attack I don't want to say attack. That's the wrong word. Are you going to go in with different objectives than you did before?
I think definitely a little bit more of a limited set of objectives. I think it's something that is probably more realistic. I certainly didn't think I was going in with a massive, change a la Obama, but apparently, that's how it was received in some areas. The communication, I think, is probably still the focus of getting that message out there, having these sort of discussions with the membership to be able to say, look, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. Um, Scott was very good at that, and I really appreciated just going on podcasts, right? I mean, it is I felt it was integral to the job to be able to have those sort of discussions, kind of like your Sunday political talk shows. Hey, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Um, and also understanding that because we were starting this new paradigm with a board and a managing director, that process was definitely a little bit more contentious than I expected. Being able to kind of figure out like who's talking to who's got what job, what is this person's responsibility, what is this person actually supposed to do. I think just being able to define that and understanding, okay, who's supposed to be handling this job, what is this person's, who's responsible for this, and then actually being able to say, okay, what are the expected results? I think there is something to be said about accountability. Accountability is, well, I think everybody did get an opportunity to kind of see that the president is obviously accountable at all levels. But I think that I would like to believe that accountability also exists, across everybody else that represents the organization in some sort of leadership capacity. And I think it's good for the membership to be able to understand, like, hey, this person is responsible for this. Okay, so what are the results? What is it that you're supposed to accomplish, and when are you going to accomplish this? And even and again, we understand that we are not. USPSA is not the same corporate organization that you might expect in the rest of the United States, but at least an understanding of, okay, if this is what we say what we're going to do, well then, at the very least, the board members should be able to respond to their members and say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is about how long it's going to take, and this is how much we think it's going to cost.
Yeah. Now, I don't remember how long was Donna in position before you?
Barely a month.
Okay. So my question is this: how much of all of that friction is because I know Donna worked with Bruce Wells and Area 6. Okay. So I'm thinking you have board members who were there, who created the new bylaws, who had an idea of what they were looking at for managing director, meaning like the managing director is going to be doing this. The person who was hired as the managing director could have had a different perspective, like, oh, Bruce was a board member. He and I have spoken. I'm thinking it's going to be this, which is a different view. Doesn't have to be a lot, but 10 degrees off from what the BOD is thinking. And then you have new people coming in thinking other things and having other ideas. How much of that was just everything colliding at one time?
I think that's a pretty accurate representation of kind of expectations of what was imagined, what was how the implementation was going to go, and then how the implementation actually went. I think that's actually a pretty good representation of, we think we're going to do this, and wait, this job actually has a lot more to it than expected, and then, okay, who's giving who's giving the minor course corrections.
Right.
So there was definitely there was definitely a lot of executive chefs.
And I can see that. Yeah, I totally get that. I almost look at it as like it needs to be the same relationship as I'm not sure how it works in California, but out here, like you have a county executive who is he's the CEO of that county basically, but he reports to the BOD, which is the county board of supervisors.
Right.
You know what I mean? So in conjunction, he's like, look, he lays everything out, and they go yes or no, or no, we need to discuss this, in other quarters at other times or whatever. But I feel like it's that same exact, should be the same type of relationship where as the board, like if you're setting the agenda, she's coming in to talk to the board, and you guys feel you need more info, then it should be like, look, we need answers to A, B, and C. Let's get back together in 2 weeks, revisit this, and then move on. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I feel like that's where everybody coming in to a brand new situation and everybody having a different perspective, it's like, blam, it was like the perfect storm.
It was definitely a little bit more contentious than I expected.
I get it. I totally get it. But I also think that maybe that position might be underpaid as well, especially for what they want.
Right.
Just just me, as well as the president. I was shocked when I saw that they dropped the salary to 50,000. I'm like, what in the world is going on?
Well,
Crazy.
the assessment at the time was that the president would no longer have the match director responsibilities for nationals. And so as a result, because match director responsibilities for nationals were again, we'll see. I don't think that's been changed in the bylaws yet. That it was truly a part-time job. Of course, the irony is that I think the presidential salary 10 years ago was $60,000 to $65,000, and it was considered a
Wow.
part-time position. So
So when Phil was in,
something like that. Yeah,
and when there was a managing director at that time too.
correct.
Wow.
So I
Interesting.
guess it's a lot of internet drama for a job that pays less than it did 10 years ago, and we're not even talking
Oh,
about the non-existent inflation.
hey, real wages are up. That's a
If
lie.
if you say
All
so.
lies. Yeah, that's what they're trying to push now. Get the hell out of here. You people are idiots. Or you think we're idiots. That's what it is. Um, anything in particular? Again, you had a limited amount of time, but from what you did see, is there looking back, you're like, oh, we really need to, or I need to talk to the guys about this particular topic as it pertains to these sets of things that we can work on to make more improvement rapidly within the organization.
Well, I think the challenge with the nonprofit in general is that rapid change is not as rapid as people think. Um, I definitely focused quite a bit on ensuring that I was communicating with the membership. I think communication within the organization is something that I wanted to. I definitely am going to, be a little bit more explicit about. Um, it's a lot of communication. I think that's one thing that I was very surprised. I anticipated to a certain extent, but I didn't quite realize just how much time I was going to be spending on the phone. It was a lot of time spent on the
Mm,
phone and just communication and coordination in general. I think at the very least, the role of the president is a fair amount of, okay, just trying to make sure that the left hand is talking to the right hand, and that both hands are communicating to the membership, which is our external customer at the end of the day. So it's a lot of just making sure that everybody's on the same sheet of music. And so I definitely want to ensure that I'm focusing a little bit more on that internally with the organization, so that there's no assumptions, um, of what is it that Yee-min is trying to do. There were definitely a few more assumptions about there's some more assumptions about intent and motivations that I didn't even know I had.
mm, okay. And I do agree with the change doesn't come rapidly, but I do feel like at times there are little things you can do. Like, and here's a quick example. I know that when I had some of these private conversations, the point was made that the way the old finance director maintained records is different than they want to do going forward. So that might be a change in software or a change in policy or something that can be acted upon quickly, which can have a big effect within a year. going forward. That would
Right.
be something quicker. Realigning divisions is not something that would happen very quickly.
Well,
So,
there was definitely progress on the financial side of actually getting the accounting done in a manner that not only provided the appropriate visibility to the board, but also in a manner that could be communicated to the membership. I mean, there was definitely it was a lot of work on the part of the managing director. Donna was spending just ungodly amounts of time, trying to make sure that that information was appropriately accounted for. And so, that was one thing that I felt that was a step in the right direction. Just being able to say, hey, where are the expenses going? Are they properly accounted for? Um, so that was something that I could say we were actually making some pretty good progress to be able to just get better visibility in general.
okay.
And if nothing else, I mean, I still believe that after every board meeting, the minutes come out, there should be there should be some format that we communicate to the membership. you know Meeting minutes are only a description of actions taken, right? You can say that, okay, we did this, but to be able to explain the context, I think that's what the membership is looking for. Membership is looking for, hey, well, you guys made this decision. Why did you guys do that? Okay, well, here's the information, that really is not, the meeting minutes are not the right place for that. But just explain why. I think that's at the end of the day, for the members that are involved and want to be involved in the sport, just explain why. Might not, we're not trying to convince you. We're not trying to say like, hey, this is the only way, but at least, providing the context. And at that point, at least the membership knows why a decision was made, and not just have
Right.
to guess in private conversations and assumptions.
Agree. And look, I still am a proponent of live streaming meetings.
Hmm.
Put schedule your executive session in the beginning or the end. Beginning would be better. Then you can just put up a screen, in executive session until you come out, and then people can watch the rest of the discussion. I honestly don't see where the issues lie with that, but I think that takes care of a lot of those things. Now, I had Todd Jarrett on, as well as him being on the debate, but he did have some good ideas. He had some things that I liked, some that I wasn't crazy about. I wasn't a fan of the 1 day nationals. I think nationals should be a marathon, not a sprint, because it should really test your consistency over days. And you see the top people, the ones who are always there at the top, are the ones who are consistent over multiple days. I like that. I think that's the best way to do it. But that's just me. However, he did have some really good ideas, and he wanted to help the sport. He wanted to help the organization, help the sport. He's motivated. He's at that point in his career. He's not looking to be a national champion, but he's still got 40 years invested in the sport that he still loves. Um, and my thought was, why couldn't we create almost like an ambassador position for someone like, and I'll use Todd as an example, who has all these ties in the sport and wants to do stuff. Maybe there's a position that the board can create where they appoint an ambassador for a certain period of time for the sport, maybe every year, so they're not, I don't know if a year is long enough. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's too short. I don't know, but where they can still give back to the sport they want to help when they have all this motivation to do that. What are your thoughts on that?
We Todd and I actually did speak quite a bit about some of his ideas. I mean, the idea of an advisory council, right? Um,
Yep.
Being able to leverage those those members that have participated in the sport for a long time, especially being able to see knowing the history and the context of what happened
Hmm.
beforehand. Um, there is something to be. I think that's something that we can still improve upon. Basically, asking those members who love and care about the sport to be able to say, hey, like how can you help us? I mean, you just ask. I think that was the thing I really appreciated about my time as president, was that just asking for help, um, just asking for help, you know, just the simple process of asking, and people would just come out of the woodwork, say, hey.
But how did you go about doing that?
A fair amount was just going through existing relationships. Hey, this is something I see. Um, is there somebody that you can recommend? This is a situation that I think that we're trying to make some improvements on, but I'm not really quite sure how we're going to go about it with our limited resources.
Well, and I asked that because at the same time, you do have, I mean, Jay Slater has created a very intriguing software. You have Practical Shooting Analytics, who has done a crap ton of work on classifiers, high hit factors, and percentages and stuff that's just out of this world. Like some of it, I look at and I'm like, there are so many lines on there. I don't know what he's trying to say, but
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing. The detail is crazy good. So there are people out there. I feel like the USPSA, you can call this a criticism if you want, but I don't mean it in a personal way, underutilizes social media to put out things. Hey, or even the email system. Hey, we're looking for people to help in this area. We're looking for input in this area and doing these things where they do garner you're basically throwing a net across the entire membership of USPSA. You get your feedback of those who want to help, then you can kind of filter through it. Oh, we'll take a world class guy, we'll take some M's, we'll take some A's, B's, and C's and mix them all together and see what we come up with. But I feel like there isn't that information going out looking for those things that people might have specialty skills with.
Well, I think that's an initiative that you can, basically process through the board, so that the board can basically say, hey, look, we acknowledge that there are members out there that are basically doing amazing things just in their own free time. I mean, I know Jay Slater, I mean, that's not his day job, right?
No.
And in the conversations that we've had, he just really enjoys the statistical analysis, kind of, self-taught. And it's been really nice to see, the evolution of his analysis, just going back from a year to where it is now. So, that's an initiative that we can communicate through the board that basically says, again, it's finding the right mechanisms within the organization to ask for that help.
Okay. The other one I had was I forget who I was talking to, but there's a lot of people who I don't want to say a lot. I don't want to put out false numbers or false hopes or anything, but there seems like there are more people than has been in the past in the short time I've been in the sport, looking to do a little bit more international travel, a little bit more international shooting. Several guests I've had on have mentioned it now. They're like several of them have said, if there's one thing I can recommend is go somewhere and shoot an international match. But other than them contacting the president to make sure for the matches they need a letter stating they're a member in good standing, there really isn't anything that anybody can point me to that says, here's how you do it.
Right.
Here's some assistance with that. So, that's one of the things we've been talking about too, is a way for USPSA to create something for the members that, whether it's on their website under the member section for international travel. Yeah, I don't know, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think it makes sense, for us to be able to have that one stop, maybe not as bad as DTS, but something similar where you can say, if you're thinking about traveling to an international match, It's generally not it's not as complicated, I think, as most people would believe. Um, I think the real challenge with international travel is really just the firearms part, because there really isn't a single solution, right? I mean, the general outline is, okay, if you want to go to this match, that match should basically tell you, hey, this is what you need to be able to travel to um, international travel for this competition. But every country can have its own unique
Yeah.
process,
Mm-hmm.
and those
Problem.
processes don't always make logical sense.
Right. And I mean, Linda Turnbull and Max Leograndis had their PCCs confiscated in a country they were traveling through in Europe.
Right.
So I get it, but I forget who I was talking to. I'm like, well, because I had talked to my wife. I'm like, hey, there's a match in country X. I'm like, looks like a pretty cool match. But I also wouldn't mind visiting there. So maybe we visit there and have a vacation at the end. I shoot the match or something. But then the thought came up, what the hell am I going to do with my guns if I shoot the match at the beginning and then I'm traveling around? Or if I shoot it at the end, what am I doing while I'm traveling around? Little things like that. It's like, and then someone told me, they're like, oh, contact the match director and say, hey, who could I leave? Sometimes he said it's with the match director himself. You just leave your guns with that guy. He'll take care of them. Hang on to them. You do what you're going to do. Come back, after you're traveling and pick them up, or when you shoot them, you just take them and leave. But little things like that, you're like, how do I do that? You know what I
It's
mean?
it's a fair amount of, I guess, it's a little bit like, the State Department. Find the consular point of contact, and then they'll usually kind of figure that out. And sometimes I know for the United States, being very sensitive to firearms laws across the country. You may not necessarily get something that says, okay, this is a very well defined, gives me a warm and fuzzy, but a lot of, there's a number of countries where they're basically trying to navigate their own unique laws as best they can.
Right. And, we have people like before the World Shoot, Becky Yackley had put out some stuff on
Yep.
travel because she's traveled all around. So she put out a bunch of stuff. I could see where somebody like that, you could, maybe work out something where she just puts together a whole thing on international travel, things to think about, checklist, because I think even one of the things she talked about, like just over the counter medication stuff.
Yep.
I was like, oh, she mentioned something in particular that I was like, oh, I would have never thought of that. So it's just things like that. It's like, whoa, if I hadn't seen it, I would have never thought that Becky would had put. It's just odd, It's just one of those things for the members. There are so many.
Yeah, there's definitely some extra considerations that, yeah, it almost makes you wish that you had an admin office that could say, okay, this is your checklist of things you have to do, your pack list, so on and so forth. And it was a great resource, and I really appreciate Becky like just taking all that time to put that into her blog post.
Yeah, yeah. That I don't even remember where I found it now, but yeah, it was very interesting. It was a good read. So, are you looking forward to possibly 4 years as the president?
I'm looking forward to serving the membership again.
Okay,
There's still a
great.
lot of good. You speak with the members that are participating in their club matches, and the love is still there. What happens at the national level, it is what it is. You can't take back what's happened in the past. It's all business for the most part, but there's still a lot of work that I felt that we were making some really good progress towards, and I'd like to just be able to continue that.
Well, that's all I've got, Yee-min. Is there anything else you wanted to mention or clarify?
Well, I know there's some questions about I know there's some questions about the path forward. Look, at the end of the day, you know,
Oh,
we're
yes.
look, at the end of the day, the election is still going to happen. We're still basically trying to vote based on what your conscience tells you as far as the members are concerned. Um, I believe in what I'm running for. I know Luigi believes in what he's running for, and regardless of who you pick, I think the members pick it should be based on who you believe is going to do the best job. The path forward, again, I would look at it the same way that the Area 4 director situation was handled. There is no RO certification. There is look at it from a double jeopardy perspective. The decision was made, the revocation was made. There has already been a consequence. Should the members decide to vote me back in, then we're kind of starting from a clean slate. This is the opportunity is presented. I look forward to basically having the opportunity to take a class, do what's reasonably required to regain that certification, so that per the bylaws, I can serve the membership as the president. So, but we could probably spend an entire show by itself just talking about the what ifs.
Yeah, we definitely could. But as I understand it, yeah, you're just gonna, if you were elected, you just petition the board. And it seems from my perspective that it's already determined that it's predetermined that if you get elected, then they're going to grant you the same opportunity they gave Mel to regain your RO and then move on from there. If I'm wrong, I'll give you the opportunity now to correct that. But
You've
that's my
probably heard more
understanding.
than I have at this point. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's the joys of politics. We have enough fun trying to talk about the upcoming presidential election for the actual United States, and now we get to talk about the potential political ramifications for our little tiny corner of the universe known as USPSA.
And I mean, if I am wrong and you do get elected and then they deny it, I think there's just going to be organization. The members might just actually. Hopefully, I'm correct in what I.
Well, we'll just assume that hope and faith is a course of action. I believe it, you
There you
believe it, so it'll happen.
there you go. It's done, 100%. Well, thanks for coming on. We're going to have to do this again in the not too distant future.
Well, it's always good to be on the show with you, David.
I appreciate it.
Until next time.
Don't be a little bitch.
Yeah.